welcome to the Counsellor and Coaches Book Club YouTube channel. Today we're doing an interview with Lianne Terry regarding her book, Breaking the Cycle. Hello Lianne, nice to meet you.
Hi Tom, and you as well. Really nice to meet you and nice to be here.
Thank you for being here, really do appreciate it. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
So as you all know, I'm Lianne. I am a counsellor. I've been counselling for 10 years on and off, originally within charities, women's centres, LGBTQ charities. And then for the last 3 years, I've had my own private practice that I run here from my home. Other things to know about me, I guess I run a networking event. I do lots of different things. I've got ADHD, so I've got the attention span of not a very good attention span, and I like to try lots of different things all the time. And then kind of away from work, I'm a mum. I've got 2 daughters. That's a big part of my life. And yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
How old are your children?
They are twin 6-year-olds.
Oh, well, twins. Hard work
Yeah,
then.
absolutely hard work. Yeah.
Wow, fascinating. 10 years of counsel about the same time as myself. So there we go.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Brilliant.
Yeah. How do you find private practice?
I love it. I love it. I think because when I first started counselling, I just did it on a part-time basis alongside a completely different field job, an office-based job. And I think since being in private practice, I've realised that that office space, that office environment was absolutely not for me. So it's really nice to kind of manage my own time, to kind of do my own thing and work out what I want my job to actually look like, I guess, what I want it to involve.
Yeah,
Yeah,
just
I
the
love it.
beautiful part of being self-employed, isn't it? You kind of make it
Yeah,
work for you. Yeah, absolutely.
absolutely.
So, Leanne, I suppose we should move on to why you're here. So,
Yeah.
yeah, your book, tell us about it and what led you to write it. There we go.
Um, so my book is called Breaking the Cycle, and it is about, let me think. So I really strongly believe that we've all been wounded by our families. And I'm not saying like, oh, blame the parents and that kind of cliche, because some of those wounds are really unintentional wounds, like the things that our parents do through their own best intention. So it isn't about blame, it's about recognizing our parents, our families, and our own humanity and capability for making mistakes. So my book's about really developing that understanding of these wounds so that you can ultimately start to heal. Again, in a bit of a
Yeah,
nutshell.
no, absolutely. I think that's really important. I was reminded of what somebody once said to me, and it's something I use with clients now, which is it's entirely possible for your parents to do the best they could and for it to be inadequate at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. And a phrase that I remember a friend saying to me many, many years ago after a relationship breakdown, but something that's always stuck with me in relation to parents, friendships, romantic relationships is just because someone couldn't meet your needs doesn't mean they weren't giving you all they'd got.
Absolutely.
Um, and
Yeah.
I think it's really important to remember that. But I think the book came about because, well, firstly, many of my clients bring family wounds to therapy. Even the ones that don't think they're bringing family wounds ultimately are. And I guess through self-reflection as well, and realizing that even though my mum is one of the best people that I know, she's still got it wrong in areas, you know? And I think a lot of clients that I work with are really unwilling to look at that because it feels blamey, it feels disloyal, they feel guilt about it. But it's just a normal part of our process as humans,
Yeah.
ultimately.
Absolutely. I remember reading once about how parents instill a set of rules on their children which are already out of date because obviously they're only working
Mm,
the rules they had from their
they
childhood.
had,
Yeah.
yeah,
And actually, it's
absolutely.
very true when we think about it. So you're already going in with only kind of half of the rule set. So it can make it very, very.
Yeah.
Mm.
And there's a chapter in the book actually about that healing generational, can't even talk, healing
Yeah.
those generational wounds. Um, and yeah, I think I was talking with a friend yesterday and we were kind of talking about how either you will follow that set of rules and you will get on board with it and you will adapt and repress and whatever else, or you will fight against it and ultimately the pendulum swings and then it goes the other way and you will be overcompensating in the other direction. And It's kind of getting the balance in the middle, isn't it, sometimes?
It is, and it's sometimes I think you said something interesting there about clients not always realizing that it feels blamey if they want to work
Mm,
on that. But actually, sometimes it's about realizing that a lot of the things we do aren't done consciously. They're just that they
yeah,
are working from that rule that we were given. And if you can
yeah.
alter that or change it, it hopefully leads to a happier existence in a lot of
Well,
cases.
it's just to give you a little snippet of my story, I guess, and something that I talk about in the book. So when I very first went to therapy a long time ago, I won't show my age by telling you how long ago it was. When I very first went to therapy, something that really came up for me was a massive fear of failure. And that's something that I still fight against today. And that comes from my mum being very, very academically pushy, very kind of setting the bar really high and feeling like I could never meet it, and so on and so forth. But then as an adult, when I've said talk to her about that, she's like, well, I just wanted more for you. And so when she was younger, because mum's quite old, she's 81. When she was younger, she was encouraged to leave school at 15 to get a job. She desperately wanted to go into further education, but was very discouraged from it. And she's like, I just wanted more for you. And that's come from a really good place, but in some ways it's been really crippling.
Yeah.
And I think, and again, that's an example of the sort of pendulum swinging there, but also that kind of, yeah, she's meant the world with that. That's been come from such a beautiful place, but it's still ultimately been quite damaging in some ways.
Do you know what? That's really fascinating because that's almost the opposite of my own story because I came
Um,
from a family that very much wanted you to leave school at 15, go get a job because
yeah,
the tradition. And actually, although that again they meant the best by that, it was actually quite damaging for me because obviously I went back to
yeah,
education later in life to do what I do for a living now. So yeah.
yeah,
And so
yeah.
it just shows how both sides can be damaging if
In
but done with the best of interests and
best
done
of
with the best
yeah,
intentions at heart. Yeah.
and
Fascinating.
that's exactly it. It's and that the kind of blurb, not the blurb, this little bit on my book here is
Yeah.
navigating unintentional damage and cultivating healing, because my book isn't about big trauma. I hate to use the word big trauma actually, but my book isn't about massive life trauma, I guess. It's about the small stuff, the day-to-day stuff, the stuff that we all kind of go through, and the stuff that we all ultimately do to our own kids as well. Unfortunately.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And that's what it is, isn't it? Because it's sometimes people think that trauma has to be intentional, but of course it doesn't.
Not at all.
Not at
No, not
all.
at
Not
all.
at all. So
Mm.
I think that leads us quite nicely on to then what kind of was your favorite part of writing the book? Because obviously it must have been quite a personal journey for you.
Yeah, yeah. I think my favorite part of writing it was, oh, it's a really good question. So I've got ADHD, so I'm not great. I've just said that before, didn't I? I'm not great at actually sitting down and writing. So I'd say probably the bit before that, the kind of thinking about what I think is really important for people to know and understand, like planning out what I was going to talk about in each section, in each chapter. And it took shape as it went along, but I had a good few ideas of, like, I wanted to talk a lot about attachment. I wanted to talk a lot about core beliefs and schemas. I wanted to talk about that generational trauma. So I think mapping that out and reflecting on my own process and why I felt that was important. I think that was probably my favorite bit, the planning process,
Um,
because I'm very much an ideas person, so that planning bit was right in my sweet spot.
I can relate to that very much. Yeah. Yeah, I'm very much, if you ask anybody that knows me, I'll say very much an ideas person, but then it's
Yeah,
the execution is
the
never is the hard
execution is
is
the
the
hard
hardest bit.
bit.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
absolutely.
So I suppose you've answered it there, really, what it felt like to write it for you, because obviously you said you had to be quite kind of strict with your planning, I guess, and quite kind of
Yeah,
mental.
do you know, it was a process of two halves in a way, because so I've been a person-centered therapist for years and years and years, but I studied CBT last year. So I planned the book out fully. Then I went into this CBT course that was like a year long, or maybe 9 months long, sort of school year, I guess. And then I went into writing the book. So I sort of planned it, took a break, and come back to write it. broadly. I'm not saying that was the exact process, but so I kind of did it in two halves. So that first bit I loved. I loved the planning. I loved kind of, yeah, getting it all structured and set up. Then the writing side was harder, much harder, because I don't concentrate well for long periods of time. I was writing at weird times of day because I'm much more focused of an evening and the night. I struggle in the morning. I was writing like 5 minutes, doing something else, 5 minutes, doing something else. And I kind of I didn't put a lot of pressure on myself, though I did have a deadline. But I know my process, and I know that if I put a lot of pressure on myself, I'd ultimately just stop,
Mhm.
and it would never get finished. So I kind of tried to be quite kind to myself, and it was a big learning curve for me because that fear of failure that I touched on there, coupled with ADHD, made it feel like a bit of an impossible task. So to have done that actually feels incredible. It feels so good.
Yeah, yeah, that's incredible, really, because it is one of those things. I think a lot of us, because I'm not an author myself, so
Mm.
I love reading and I love talking to authors.
Yeah,
The thought of trying to create and write, but it just seems insurmountable in many ways, you know.
yeah, yeah. And it's something that I've wanted to do for ages. But I've always had a bit of like, who am I to do this? Bit of imposter syndrome, and that's still there a little bit. Don't get me wrong, but the fact that I've done it feels so good. Um, that it's all been worth it, actually.
Good. So, how long did it take you from kind of the idea of writing to publish?
Mm. So as I said there, I took kind of 9 months out of the process. So I would say 6 months on the planning stuff, kind of 9 month break, and then 6 months on the writing. Or maybe a little bit less than that even, say 4 months on the writing and then 2 months on the sort of self-editing, beta reader
Yeah.
phase. So I finished all of that. Let me think. So the book came out on the 30th of May. I think I finished all of that roughly by the sort of end of March. In fact, no, before that. So I went on holiday on the 23rd of March, and I'd finished it before I went. So yeah, it was all done by then.
Wow. Okay.
And then obviously, yeah, it came out on the 30th of May.
Yeah. And how did that launch day? How did that feel?
Uh, um, I was so anxious. And I'm not particularly anxious in the day to day. It's not a trait that I would say about myself in general. But in the week leading up to it, I was so tense. And I kept saying to my wife, like, what if no one buys it? What if everyone hates it? What if the reviews are all rubbish? Like, what if? And she was like, just breathe. Like, you feel good about it, and that's the main thing. Um, and yeah, and now we're kind of what, 2 weeks on from that? Nearly 2 weeks on. And I've sold lots and lots of books. The reviews that I've had so far is only three, but they're really, really good. So yeah, so that some of that tension was maybe unfounded, but I really cared about it actually. And again, as someone who's got a fear of failure, I am very, very guilty of not going all in on things and kind of procrastinating a little bit, and um yeah, not trying that hard so that it's not as much of a bother if I fail at it.
Okay. Yes.
um but with this book, I've gone all in probably for the first time ever, and it feels really good. Yeah.
I
So
think
yeah, the anxiety was definitely there. Yeah.
I think I saw a video of you actually on launch day. Were you having a small glass of champagne and just?
Yes, I
Yes.
may well have been.
I
Yes.
think you are. Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned your wife there. Is it? What's your wife? Is it Amanda? Is that your wife?
Amanda, yeah,
Yeah.
Amanda.
So I imagine she was very supportive through the process and a bit of a rock for you.
Yeah, she's been incredible. And it's really interesting actually because she's read the book. It's not her thing. When I first wrote the first chapter, which is about attachment, she read it. She's not my target audience. She read it and she was literally like, I don't know what this means.
Ha,
I was
ha.
like, okay, great, thanks. And so she's massively supportive, even though she does not get it in the slightest. Like therapy and personal development and anything like that is very much outside the realms of her life ultimately. But she's been so supportive. Like as I say, I've got two kids, and I found it much easier to write in an evening. So she's picked up a lot there in terms of looking after our daughters. She has publicized my book in her work massively. Yeah, she's been great. And she's just put up with my general tension and anxiety and the drama of the last few weeks where I've been pretty absent actually as a wife and a mother.
Yeah, I think that happened. I think I mentioned to you briefly before we started the recording. My wife's actually an author, and
Yeah,
there are times
yeah,
I don't see her for weeks, months. Really, she's
yeah,
in a room writing. It's like
yeah,
I'm
but
sure she's okay in there, but
yeah, yeah,
it's just really funny. As I said, I'm not an author myself, but I've obviously written academic work on counselling and things like
yeah.
that. And I will get my wife to proofread it, and she'll say something along the lines of, "Well, it's English and it's spelt right, but I don't know what it means."
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And I like that though, that kind of support, even though not on the same page sort of
yeah.
thing. I love that. I think
Absolutely.
it's
Yeah, it's
fantastic.
really nice, isn't it? So let's talk a little bit more about the publishing process for you. So you
Ooh.
mentioned that you use kind of a hybrid process. So just talk
Yes.
through that and how that kind of works.
Yeah. So I work with a company called Authors and Co. And they were fantastic really from start to finish. So they actually provide a lot of guidelines around structuring and how to get that structure out. They provide a lot of guidelines around like your marketing process and your promotion and all of that sort of thing. Um, and they provide support around like they've got cover designers, so they design my cover. They have got like proofreaders. They've got editors and all different kinds of people that are involved. But ultimately, like the content is on me. The kind of self-editing process and beta reading process, that's all managed by myself. The kind of like looking after it now has been all handed over to me. So looking after the kind of Amazon side of it and all those sorts of things now sit back with me. So it's a really nice way of doing it, I think, because my administrative skills are not great. So the fact that someone's picked up all that and just done it for me has been fantastic. I don't think I could have managed that myself on top of the kind of writing aspect of it. I think having some guidance as a first time writer around that sort of structure process was really useful as well, and will be useful for me if there is a second book at any point. I'm not sure about that at this point. Don't get me wrong, there are ideas there, but obviously ideas person. But so yeah, I think that that will be something that I can take with me kind of to whatever I do in future ultimately. So I loved that I did it that way because I don't think I could have managed the self-published side of it myself, and I didn't want to go down a traditional publishing route because I think that brings with it a hell of a lot of difficulties as well.
Yeah, it's interesting that. So of all the people I've spoken to and interviewed, that's one of the things they say. The writing is actually only a small part of it. Is everything else that's where
Yeah,
the really hard work is. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So well, you kind of touched on it there, but that was going to be my last question. But as soon as you mentioned it, I'll ask it now. So is there an idea for another book?
There's a few. I've got a few ideas for future things. Yeah, I don't really know where I'm going with them yet. There's a number of things in my mind. I would like to um do something that is more focused on queer families, I guess, because that's my own perspective, my own frame of reference, and my book is ultimately reasonably heteronormative.
Okay.
I mean, it is and it isn't, I guess, but it's looking at, your kind of standard family structures and whatever else. I'd like to write something that is more focused on relationships, between like romantic relationships rather than family relationships, I guess, as a kind of next step, maybe as I don't know, many, many ideas, I guess. There's a lot going on in there, always.
Watch this space kind of thing then really.
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
But I think the ideas, that's the important bit, isn't it? If you said you had no ideas, then there wouldn't be, but there's obviously actually a few ideas in there for
Yeah, it's more
yeah.
the other way. I've got too many ideas and I
Yeah,
need to kind of bring them in.
yeah, absolutely. Okay.
Mm.
So would you have any advice to give a first time author? Is there anything you've learned through the process?
I think believe in yourself ultimately because it is a really hard process. I think for lots of people, I'm sure there are some people that find it easy, but it's a hard process for lots of people. Um, and I think for me, there were a number of times when I was like, oh, I just can't do this anymore. I don't know. Like, I think I can't think which chapter it was in my book that there was a specific chapter that I was like, I don't know where to start. I do not know how to write this. I don't know. I just don't know. And I think historically, like 10 years ago, me, that would have just been like a hard stop and I would have been done with it. But it's kind of having that self-belief that, yeah, you can do it. And I think before writing a book, I guess my advice would be to work on your mindset,
Mm.
actually.
Okay. Oh, I like
Um,
that. That's quite, yeah.
yeah, I think, you know, particularly if you are someone that does have that fear of failure, I think writing a book is something that can really trigger into that.
Mm.
So yeah, a little bit of work on that mindset, that self-belief, that kind of um, looking at what your barriers might be before you go into that process, I think would be really good advice.
I think that's really good advice. Yeah, and it's interesting actually because you said there some people might find it easy. I have to admit, out of all the people I've ever spoken to, interviewed, and no author has ever said they find it.
I was a bit, as I said it, I was a bit like, am I being assumptive there? And that's why I kind of almost
No,
caveated it.
I'm sure there is somebody out there somewhere that thinks it's easy.
Yeah, yeah.
I've never met them yet. Um, is there actually this wasn't on our script, so I'm just going to throw this one at you as a bit of a curveball. But
Okay.
is there anybody that you kind of inspired you to write, an author or a person or?
Oh, that's a great question. Is there anyone that inspired me to write? Do you know, when I was a little girl, I always wanted to be a writer, probably a fiction writer. I think because I didn't understand non-fiction when I was a little girl, but yeah, I always wanted to be a writer. And oh, I love this question because I'd written that off by the time I was about 18. So I was like, no way I could do that. That's way too much. And since having daughters, so one of my daughters is, both my daughters are fantastic and they're going to do amazing things. I'm absolutely sure of it. But one of them particularly, it wants to be a writer, and she's wanted to be a writer probably since she was about 3. She loves reading like that kid reads morning till night, and I think actually thinking about it, like showing my daughters that you can be whatever the hell you want to be, has been really important to me. And I think coming back to this kind of dream that I had as a little girl that I'd let go of long time ago because life didn't lead me that way. Um, and I say that I mean, I've been a writer for years. I've written bids and contracts and technical documents for a really long time, actually. That's what I did for my kind of office job for long times, but never actually saw it as being a writer. And I think it was really important to show my little girl that we can do these things. We can do whatever we want to. So I'd say that my kid really is the inspiration.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
That's a great answer. I really like that.
Yeah, thank you. But it's absolutely true. And I don't know, you may have seen on my Facebook if you're on my Facebook, just scroll back a little bit and you'll see that on the week that my book was coming out, she wrote a book as well.
Oh wow.
Um yeah, and it's she typed it up on the computer. It's kind of the first time that she's really used the computer, and she typed it up and she designed a cover and she stapled it all together, and it's on my social media if anyone wants to have a little look at the book that my daughter wrote. And she also did a little video for me introducing my book. This is my mummy's book, Breaking the Cycle. So that's on my social media as well, because they're my biggest fan club. And Elodie, the one that I mentioned there, she says to me, like, I'll go on Amazon and I'll check how many books I've sold each day because I'm a bit obsessive about that at the minute. And whatever number I say, whether it be like 30 or 5, she's like, Mummy, I'm so proud of you. And I'm just like, yeah, that feels really good. That
Yeah.
feels really good.
I think that's a yeah. I think that's probably the best answer I've ever had on that question. To be honest,
I'll
I think
take
that's
that.
it's so nice that's really nice that's yeah.
Mm,
Really like that.
yeah, thank you. Thank you.
So that kind of brings me to the end of my scripted questions. So have you got anything else you'd
Yeah.
like to add?
If I got anything else I'd like to add, that feels like the hardest question you've asked me so far.
Sorry.
I don't think so. I think I'd really love anyone who's listening to read the book. Firstly, it's just 99p on Kindle, so it's not you know, it's not extortionate. And I wrote it with a real desire to change the world, as cheesy as it sounds. Like, a part of me as a therapist went into being a therapist, as I'm sure lots of you guys who are watching did, to make a difference. And I think a part of writing the book for me has been about making that difference. So the more people that I can touch with it, the better, ultimately.
Fantastic. And I will drop a link in the comments below on YouTube so that there's a link for it on Amazon, isn't it? That's where it's available.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And just remind us of the title, Leanne, so that everybody can
So it is Breaking the Cycle. And I'm Lianne Terry. So yeah, that's me.
follow. Right, Leanne, it's been an absolute pleasure to think
Oh, it's
about.
been really nice to meet you, Tom.
Yeah, thank you ever so much.